All right, welcome to the RHE podcast. This is Rob Schock in Bakersfield, California.
This is Isaiah Diesel. I'm calling out of South Korea, and happy late Christmas to you, Rob.
Happy late Christmas to you. And we have a Christmas guest, a late Christmas guest tonight. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about her.
Her name's Chiara, and we met in a Christian podcast community. So it's actually really great having Facebook groups, because if you think about as the way it was in the past, like you never knew people around you who might have the same kind of ideas or questions that you have. So having a community online, I think, has been very helpful for me in a lot of different ways. So we share some things, and we get to meet each other, and we get to invite each other on, as we're doing now, you know?
And I'm excited because she is also a writer, and I am also
Right.
an aspiring writer. So I need to actually start writing things to become a writer. So, so without further ado, let's introduce her. Hello, Chiara.
Hi there, Rob and Isaiah. I thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I really enjoy being on this podcast, and I really thank you guys for doing the work out there and introducing guests and all the things that you are talking about. I have a quote that I, often tell people is I'm not a best-selling author. I'm just a nobody who uses storytelling to encourage others to find their purpose and save their souls.
Wow.
I'm a wife, I'm a busy mom, I'm an author, and I'm a woman after God's heart. And sometimes when I ponder that declaration, I find it's more appropriate to claim that I'm a woman after God's heart first. He has given me a gift of writing, and I honor Him through my written works. I write inspirational and Christian drama, and where I am empowering women to discover their faith, use perseverance to overcome adversity, and become heroes of their own destinies. I also write middle grade fantasy fairy tales to encourage girls in developing strong morals and values, and to always stand up for what is right. I am a first-generation American in my family. My parents are from Italy. They were born there, and I was born here. And when they came to this country in the late 60s, one of the biggest challenges they had was language. They worked 2 jobs each, trying to build our home, and through that, they overcome those challenges. So my parents are really heroes in the things that they have done. And so hard work has been instilled in me from when I was a child. And in the last 6 years, I have been blessed to have published 4 books. One is a Christian romance called Love's Perfect Surrender, 2 middle grade fantasy fairy tales, Petrella the Gillian Princess, and a tribute to Talipia. And then my latest inspirational fiction, She Made It Matter, that just came out late this fall. All of my writings contain an element of Christianity and faith. I never set out to be a writer. I was always a reader. I tell people I also have 2 addictions, reading and writing. And if I'm not doing neither one of them, it makes me very antsy. When I started doing the writing, it just happened. And so I never set out to be a Christian writer. It's who I am, who I've meant to be. And my writing is an outlet, a spilling of my emotions, my random thoughts, any imaginary characters that consume my mind 24 hours a day. The best conversations are with yourself, and I tend to do that a lot, as my family says to me. So I need to write, just like I need to eat and breathe and exercise and everything. So that's how I've gotten into writing, and it's part of my passion, and the Lord is part of my passion too. So until He takes the words out of the thoughts out of my mind, I will write for Him, and He's my audience.
Wow.
That's
That was quite an introduction. Wow.
that is amazing. Yeah, yeah. Writing
Well,
is
thank
your.
you.
Do you even want? I don't even have anything to say. I'm just like, wow.
No,
I'm
I
starting to
do.
feel
I
like
do because
an unachiever now.
I want to talk to. I want to ask you about maybe what would be probably your gateway drug into your addictions. Basically, obviously, you start off by reading. Everyone starts off by reading before they even start writing anything. I just wanted
Yes.
to know, like, what were you? Maybe you could talk about some of your inspirations.
I'm a middle child, and I have an older sister and a younger sister. And I took care of my younger sister a lot while my parents worked 2 jobs apiece. And to escape and to just get away after my responsibilities, it was about around when I was about 11 years old, I discovered Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boy books. And I devoured them. I inhaled those stories. I mean, Nancy Drew is my heroine, really. I mean, the mysteries came to her, and she was able to solve all those things. And so as I was reading those, I started to keep a journal, and I started writing a journal. And, when you're at 11, 12 years old, boys may play basketball or baseball. I was playing tennis against our, rental, our apartment building, against the wall, and writing because it was my escape. So all my thoughts were kind of poured into there. And then I started writing poems. And so from poems, it kind of progressed to short stories when I was in high school. And then when I got into college, I continued writing the short stories, but now they started to become a little bit longer and longer. But the study, my background is an instructional designer. When I started doing more, when I got my first job, I started paying less attention to my writing. And I had a prosperous career, 14, 15 years of an instructional designer. I was a human resource recruiter. I received many accolades. I was very successful. I had, great relationships all across the board, but there was always something missing, and it was a constant void in my life. And in 2005, you could say I had a premature nervous breakdown in a sense, or a midlife crisis, you could say, even though I'm not that age. But and so I left the corporate world, and I started dedicating more and more time to writing. And each of my books, believe it or not, my first book, Love's Perfect Surrender, took about 9 years to write. And my last book took about 9 years plus another 4 to edit and get it finalized. And then my 2 middle grade fiction took about a year or so each. So it takes a long time to write. And if you're working and if you have other responsibilities, you have to be able to balance that. And what I often tell aspiring writers is you have to dedicate time every day to writing, whether it's 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, whether you write on a tablet or you speak into your phone or you carry a little notebook in your hand. I do. I carry a notepad in my hand wherever I go, and if that inspiration hits, I have to put it down. Now, it's not to say that I haven't had writer's block. Oh boy, I have had writer's block. So what do I do in that process? I read. I read authors. I read different authors. I continue to write in my journal, and I read as much as I can, because in order for me to become a better writer, I have to read a lot too.
That's amazing. And my first book took about 5 years or so because there were a lot of breaks in between, and I was some stuff along the way, some stuff that I still hadn't came to terms with. My second book, in which I've been working on for the past maybe around 9 years, it got to the point where because it's a lot of it is about my traveling overseas. But when I
Uh-huh.
started writing the book, I wasn't a father. And so when I became a father later on, it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. So I had to like readjust it because some of the things that I thought back in the day weren't there. Recently, I have tried my hand in fiction, and that's something I generally don't read as much. I mean, I have read a few books. 1984 is my favorite book of all time, but
Mm-hmm.
I do tend to lean more towards like historical or political or religious kind of like nonfiction stuff. But
Yes.
I recently, as an exercise, got my hands on a book by Stephen King. You familiar with him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I literally listened to that thing and read it maybe half a dozen times because I just could not believe how rich the details were and how he was writing. And it really has been the source of inspiration for the next fiction that I'm writing. But I want to ask you a question because I am in the middle of writing myself. How do you make sure you finish whatever you're writing?
Here's an example. And writing for me is like submerging yourself in water and being underwater for a long period of time. And until I get the characters and the story arc and the description, everything that has to flow the right way, the way the story is to be told, because I am just the communication vessel. I let my characters dictate the story, and I have to get into their minds and bodies and actually let them lead me to the story. So until I have that right, I'm in underwater. And you have to have a good set of lungs in order to be a writer because you're really holding your breath for a long time until you get that story just right. You know, some people outline. I do outline. If I have an idea in my head, what I do is I take a notebook, you know, those real, 25-cent, 50-cent notebooks, and I start making like what I call little pads, little circles. And sometimes I will have a person's name that I'm just reflecting on. And other times I have the story. And so it's almost like you have to marry these pieces all together in order to come to fruition. And, and that's kind of how it works. In my latest novel, She Made It Matter, it's about a married woman with 2 children, but she is on a journey to to regain her sobriety and to find salvation and earn forgiveness and self-worthiness because of past trauma. And so when I had started writing that story, I thought about alcohol addiction. I thought about my own idols and addictions that I have. And I thought about people who struggle with addiction and how they have this perfect life and how they throw it out the window because they're constantly consumed. And so then I went to my idols and my addictions, and I was looking at from both avenues, and that's how that story came about. And so here is this woman who's living this how I can't pronounce the word, this idyllic life. And here she is, she's consumed by alcohol, but why? Why? What are these demons of her past? And how can she make her life right again? And so that's how that story came about. So sometimes it's a name, it's a vision of a person, it's a place, and and that's how the story builds. It's kind of like Jenga, you just kind of have to keep pulling those pieces together.
I'm a bit of a geek, and so I was probably more pulled towards your fairy tale works. And I realized that they were, they're basically, kid stories, and I found them probably the most accessible. So I just kind of went with those ones when I looked up your stuff. I tried out one on my 4-year-old son. Trella, the Gillian Princess, which I like to call Deus Ex Little Mermaid.
Yes.
And I got to the point where it said that she went to Metallica Point.
Yes.
And I was a Metallica fan. I'm a Metallica fan, and of course, my 4-year-old son's a Metallica fan now. And that kind of perked his ears up. And I assumed he imagined that it was just like a place where they have Metallica concerts every once in a while. But does that have anything to do with the band? Why you chose that name for that particular location?
Yes, my husband loves Metallica, and he's and you know this story. I had it narrated into an audiobook, and I had a wonderful woman who narrated it, who has a British accent, and so because this story interweaves themes similar to The Little Mermaid, Cinderella, Tangled, and such, I wanted to make it, you know, very authentic, where, you know, they're going to Metallica Point, you know, and so that kind of, I don't know, I must have heard Metallica that day when I was writing the story, but I know that my husband, he really loves Metallica. So, and then, you know, I wanted to make it that authentic, you know, kind of story fairy tale, so I added the point to it. So you picked that up pretty good.
Well, I couldn't help it, you know.
Chiara, I find that if you're writing some kind of fiction or really any kind of story at all, it's virtually impossible to not weave in elements into characters, either from yourself or from your experiences or people who you've met along the way. Like, even if you just go and you just start writing off the top of your head about any topic, it seems like you would have to draw from those kind of things. Like, you can't really, it's really hard to just make stuff up out of nowhere. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. You know, the biggest thing, you know, and you've probably heard it. I mean, it's, you know, it's a common phrase, you know, write what you know. All writers, you know, have been told, write what you know, park your butt in front of the computer or wherever you need to do and sit there and write what you know. But a lot of times I find that you need to challenge yourself too and write what you don't know. These 2 middle grade aged fiction, fantasy, fairy tales that I wrote was something that I didn't know how to do. And maybe it was God, you know, kind of detouring me, because Petrella the Gillian Princess was inspired by my daughters, because I read a lot of, you know, fairy tales to them, and A Tribute to Talithia is a parable on bullying, but it's about a tulip in a forest oasis with tangled brush and vines and shrubs that pick on her. And my daughter, my one daughter, was being bullied at one time. And so to help explain a little bit better on how to stand up for what you believe in and what is true and right, I wrote that one. And so it kind of is, you know, I drew upon that, our experience, but I put it in a way that other people can relate to it as well.
You just mentioned A Tribute to Talithia, and I was drawn towards the tenets of surviving the Jade Oasis, and you talked about, you said that, you know, it was inspired how your daughter was dealing with bullying, and so I just kind of imagined that you just kind of like, you wanted to set her sort of a roadmap on how to deal with other people who aren't exactly dealing with you very well. But did that have any sort of like biblical connotation at all? Sort of like a 10 Commandments kind of a thing?
No, I'll read them out loud here. The respect history, even if you don't agree with it. Mm-hmm. Get along with your rivals. Don't complain. Set your focus to complete. There is no shame in asking for help, and do the right thing. You can see here the story, even though she is bullied, it is about unifying a changing forest. And it could be pretty relevant to the things that are going on in our world today. Sometimes things that have, the things that have happened historically, we may not agree with them, but they're part of history. And so we need to grow from those things and to respect it as it is, historical, and go from there. Getting along with your rivals is we can agree to disagree. And just like we are all from different backgrounds, the three of us here on this podcast. And so if we have differences, we can agree. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to be rivals. But if we are, we can agree that it's okay. It's debate. And it's all right. And it's healthy. Don't complain. Don't take things for granted. Set yourself to finish the job, finish the race. You make a commitment, you have to follow through. A lot of times kids will say, oh yeah, I want to do this. And then all of a sudden they'll be like, no, I don't want to do it anymore. No, we're gonna finish it because you made a commitment and you have to follow through. There's no shame to asking for help. We can't battle the world on our own. We can't do it by ourselves, and there's no shame. And people who struggle with addictions and things like that, and people who suffer from mental issues or what have you, there's nothing wrong with you. You are wonderfully and beautifully made, and so you will ask for that help. And always do the right thing for other people all the time. So this book can even be for grown-ups too, as a reminder to live their life. And Rob, you had asked about, is there some biblical things to this? And Jesus, he laid his life down for us. He died on the cross so that he would take our sins from us. And so sometimes if you make those sacrifices and you lay down your life, that's what a true friend does, is to lay down their life in order to save another. And if we had that compassion towards each other as humans, I think we live in a better world, right? Instead of our selfish self.
Well, and Jesus talked about, loving your neighbor and everything like that, right? But I think I like this get along with your rivals thing, because it's like, okay, yeah, we are neighbors. We're in this world together, but there's only so much of it to go around, and we are kind of competing for whatever we can get out of it. And, even though it's important to make sure that you have love and compassion for each other, we also have to understand that we're going to be competing with each other for certain things. Basically, just to have respect for each other, and don't be a bad sport, I guess, would be the takeaway from that. If you don't win in the rivalry, you can still love your rival, basically.
Right. Have you ever read The Four Agreements?
Who is that by, Isaiah? Why does that sound familiar?
He wrote another book called The Mastery of Love. What he is he has some kind of it's either in his ancestry or he just researched it. It's like Toltec wisdom, ancient Native American wisdom. And so
yes.
So it's a very good book. I highly recommend it. But his 4 points are, one of them is always do your best job. And so he talks in there different times you're not able to do the same kind of job that you could do at a different time, whether you're tired or you have stress going on in your life, but you do your best in the time. Another one that he has is that you don't take things personally. So if somebody says something that you find disagreeable or offensive, you have to understand that doesn't reflect on you, but it reflects on the person. So I think if we understand that with bullying, that bullies are actually given an outside reflection of what's going on inside of them, then I think we can have more compassion for a bully and not just see as they need to be punished. Like, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be disciplined, but from someone who has both been a victim of bullying and also been a perpetrator of bullying, I know now that as a healthy person, that if you truly loved yourself, you never could hurt someone else, because you would know that you hurt yourself also. So you lose
Yes.
respect for yourself as well. So
Yes.
I thought those are great points. And but what do you think about that? Like, what do you think our should be response to bullying? Because, and the reason why I'm asking you this is because I live in South Korea, and
Uh-huh.
South Korea is very, very bad for bullying. And some kids commit suicide in America,
Oh.
but a lot more wind up committing suicide from bullying here than in America. So, what do you
Yes.
think could be something in which we could do to help bullies?
I think it starts in the home too.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of times bullying can start at the home, whether the mother, the father, the older brother, older sister, what have you. You really have to find an outlet in order to get away from those situations. You know, it's always like, don't go finding trouble. You know, when I was a kid, you know, my parents would say, don't, you know, be careful, don't go find trouble, or else trouble will find you. Because if you mix yourself in the wrong type of group, then you are going to get hurt and something's going to happen. In a situation where you're surrounded, like Talipia, surrounded by all these people, you have to really find your own self-worth, even if you're standing alone. You know, I could have gone into many different directions when I was younger and I was a preteen and teen. I had a lot of friends who dabbled in drugs at the time, and I just felt that if I did that, it would hurt my body, it would hurt my mind, and that fear was always there. Now, growing up an Italian, we always had wine at the dinner table. It was something we had. I mean, it's not like my dad sat on the couch drinking a bottle of wine. We had it for dinner. And then my American friends would be like, when I was, you know, later in high school, they'd be like, oh, hey, my parents aren't home. Let's raid the refrigerator or something and have a beer. And I'd be like, oh, okay. I just had a glass of wine with dinner. I don't understand what you're talking about. They're like, you drank wine for dinner? I'm like, I have it every day. I don't understand. So for them, it was, you know, it was something because they didn't have that, and so they wanted it. And so I had to step back and say, okay, I can go with them, and then they'd make fun of me, and they would bully me in a sense, and say, oh, you don't want to try this, or you don't want to smoke this. And I thought, you know what, I don't, because I want to be healthy. So, you know, so in that sense, if you don't have that at home, you have to find good people, get into youth groups, or you know, change friends. And, you know, and sometimes if you have to stand up for those things, you're going to be by yourself for a while, but you can't lose faith. You can't lose that hope. You have to set your own journey. You can either go, I always tell my daughters who are now 12 and 10, you either can go the right way or you can go the wrong way. It's up to you, because the decisions that you make today will affect you 5 years from now. And if you start making incorrect decisions, then you're going to pay the price later, you know, and that's what, as a young person in today, you have to start making good decisions for yourself as best as you can. Even if your parents make mistakes, and you know, I'm not a perfect parent. My parents aren't perfect parents. For perfect parents. I mean, there's, you know, we all make mistakes. Every generation has mistakes, but you take them and you move forward. You respect history, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's your history going forward.
You know what my position is. basically that people are scared. Basically, we're just all scared apes trying to like figure out how to get through in this life, and basically, that's anything that we do, like bullying, boils down to that. And when it comes to what we're trying to do, this is why I think it's important for us to have, compassion and empathy and understanding of, where the human condition is coming from, and the podcast is called Respect, Humility, Empathy. And it's basically our agenda is to find understanding, be open and honest about our opinions and our differences, but try to come to some sort of terms. And whenever we disagree and can't really come to terms, then we just kind of
move on.
Just call a truce, basically. Okay, we'll
no. It's an armistice. It's an armistice. There's a difference.
Exactly.
An armistice only temporarily stops the war. No, but really, on a for real point though, I'm kind of joking there. We had the idea when we first started this. Is I had like these boxing gloves, and it was like this really high octane introduction, and it was like, oh, atheists versus Christians. Let's debate this out. And I said, we're going to trick people because what we're actually doing is we're interacting in a very respectful way. So it's like we're painting it as like a Christian versus atheist, but that's not really what it is. I mean, I think last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Rob had talked about needing to change the electoral college. And I was like, Rob, I think that's the only time you and I have actually agreed on anything that we've said this whole time. Because, but either way, though, the reality is that we've both talked about the faults and the weaknesses of our points. Because I think as Christians, one of the problems that we do is that we think that we need to present a side that is perfectly flawless, not only of ourselves, but also about Christianity as a whole. And the reality is, though, if you take a step back and you just say, okay, let's just objectively think about this as believers, but also how somebody else would view what we're teaching. If we do that, then we have to stop and pause and say, not everything makes total sense about this. If you're trying to explain something like the Trinity, there's no real way we can explain it with human logic. In fact, we were talking about this, I think last week, about how I was trying to kind of explain it and saying it relies on logic in which I simply don't understand. So there's been some times I've had to ask Rob in which I knew he wasn't going to be able to answer the question. And so afterwards, he's just kind of like, well, I really don't have an answer for that. And I just had to say, well, I don't think it's like, I'm not going to beat you to death on that point, because it's not proper for me to expect you to answer every last question whenever I can't answer every last question. So that's where the humility comes in what we're doing. And I think if bullies or people who are getting bullied by them, or people who have disagreements online, because online has made way for bullies to express themselves online through Messenger or through Facebook posts. And I think if you really just stopped and take a step back and say, hey, I'm a fallible person, this person's a fallible person, we may disagree on something, it doesn't mean we need to hate each other.
That's very true. And I like the title of your podcast, Respect, Humility, and Empathy, because respecting other people's decisions, having empathy, seeing it from that person's perspective, and having the humility in yourself to do that, because you need to have all three ingredients. It's like you're making a recipe, and this is a recipe for life. And if people don't do that, then they just are only one-dimensional. And like you said, on the Facebook post, people will just spurt out something. Well, then another person that is disagreeing with them will read it and will be like, oh, fired up. And then all of a sudden it goes through this whole thing. I've been involved in a lot of controversial post. But then after a while, I was like, you know what, I'm done. So you know what I do?
Right,
I just
right.
scroll past it. If you don't agree, that's okay. It's
Right.
like turning the page on a magazine,
That's a
and
good
you'll
point.
feel better yourself.
I do want to get into kind of like the meat of what we're talking about because, as you know, I am a Protestant. Rob is an atheist, and you
Little
yourself
a,
are Catholic. Small
Mhm.
a
small
atheist.
a
He's a
atheist.
soft atheist. We've tried to clearly define what we believe in, and so it's been really good listening to have Rob define what he believes in rather than what I think he believes in or someone else that says that he believes in. So that's been good. But that being said, I do want to ask you one question as a Protestant, because I do want to take a step back and frame this for a second, because both my parents were Catholics and both of them did convert to being Protestants. And
Mhm.
I was about to say being a Christian. I wanted Rob corrected me on that because I made this distinction as, okay, you're Catholic and I'm Christian, and he's like, oh, don't you mean Protestant? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, because I do believe we're both Christians. But that being said, what would you say is the biggest thing that both Protestants have in common? But also, if you could define the biggest difference in one sentence, how would you do that?
I honestly don't know a lot about Protestant. I consider myself now a Catholic Christian because I feel that I have now been reading a lot more of the Bible, and in Catholicism we focus more on the New Testament. But in order to understand the New Testament, I've had to go back and read the Old Testament because that's been preparation throughout the whole thing.
Can you talk a little bit about what brought you to Catholicism? Were you raised that way? Were you raised differently?
No, being Italian, we're pretty much Roman Catholic, and the saints are very much, they always celebrated different saints in the town where my parents grew up in Italy,
Yes.
and they held them a very high esteem, the saints, and they believed in baptism and communion and confirmation and all the various sacraments that you have to do in a Catholic church.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you indulge me in one thing? Could you
Yes.
describe exactly what are saints?
Like Mary is a saint.
Mhm.
Then you have Saint Michael's that they had like a big feast. Go ahead. Yes, I'm
Angels,
sorry.
or are they like just people who become sort of like gods, or
Something like that, where they were stories that were passed down from many generations. In my town where my parents are from, they have a Saint Michael, and he was a saint that was off a boat in the middle of the water, and he did something. I don't know all the story offhand right now. They celebrate him every October in my parents' town, and they had, they put what they have done is they put all the saints at the same level almost as Jesus. And in my study now that I have been, studying for myself these last few years, is the saints is Christianity defines us all as saints on earth. And so if you are putting these people who've done, various miracles or have saved people, like when you go to France, there's Lourdes in France, where people said that the Virgin Mary appeared there, and people go and they dip themselves in the water and they get healed from all these ailments and things like that. I believe that, but I don't want to put them at the same pedestal in Jesus, because in the Bible Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life, and in order to get to God, you have to come through me. And so as I've studied these things and how I was raised, that we have to go to this feast and celebrate this saint, and we have to go to that feast and celebrate that saint. So we were always going to these celebrations and dinner dances when I was younger, but I never really understood why we had to put these saints on such a high pedestal. And now years later, I see a lot of these older Italians see it as, a hope in there. But I also want to tell them, you are a saint too. Your life has been a hope to somebody else. And so it's part of tradition. And so because of their tradition, clung to that in a sense. I followed, what my parents wanted. I got baptized. I got my communion. I did all that. But, now that I look back, in order to be fully into God, you have to confess that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, and you believe that He died on the cross for you to take your sins, and then you can get yourself baptized as an adult. And when I was baptizing my daughters, you need to baptize them because they're a part of God's family. And I said, okay, yeah, I believe that. They're part of God's family, and I'm going to raise them the best way to know about God and to know about Jesus. But one day, if they study more and they want to get baptized in adults, I'd be right there happy for them.
Interesting story. My dad did baptize me in a pool at the age of 12 years old. And then whenever I became a Christian, a full 20 years later, at the age of 32, I asked him to baptize me again, and he baptized me in our bathtub. So that was a totally amazing experience that he was able to do that. But I do have another question I want to ask you. So my mom grew up a Protestant or Catholic, and later on she converted to Catholicism. And then what happened is the rest of her family didn't want her to be around our grandmother alone because they were fearing that my mom would convert her to being a Protestant. So I want to ask you, where do you think a lot of the animosity, or we say in layman's terms, beef, like problems, where does that arise from as far as Catholics and Protestants?
I don't know. Here's a question for you now. What would be the three main things of being a Protestant? And then I can kind of tell you how the Catholicism kind of sees that.
I would say one of the things is that we believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, which means that the Bible doesn't have faults in it. We believe in Jesus Christ, that He died for our sins, and that nothing that we do could ever pay for our salvation. So I know theologically that's a big difference, because you have to do like Hail Marys or have rosaries and stuff like that. And we kind of just believe that Jesus paid the price for us. And then three, I would say that maybe the Holy Spirit lives inside of us, and He's active, and He's working inside of our lives always. And that's how we become more like Jesus Christ, by following His Spirit.
I would say that in Catholicism, a lot of Catholics get their direction from the Pope, because he is considered the head of the Catholic Church. It doesn't sound like in Protestant you have like a papal authority. Because of that, their direction is from there. When you think of pastors or Christian pastors, they can marry, but in Catholic priests, they can't marry. And you can't have women as priests. You can only have them as nuns in the Catholic Church. I would say the biggest thing is that I don't know if there's an animosity towards it, but I would say it is more like the direction of who provides that direction, because in Catholicism it has more of the saints. Now, I don't think in being a Protestant you have saints and you put them at a higher level. I don't think you have that.
Another question I have is, you have tradition. How do you reconcile that with whenever you know that runs absolutely counterintuitive to things in the Bible. For example, in the New Testament, it's assumed that ministers have wives because it says you should be married to one wife. So it assumes that that person has a wife. So whenever you have tradition that's being passed down to you and you see it, what is your response to that? And by the way, just so we're clear, Protestants do this as well. So I'm not, this is not a picking on Catholics. I'm just asking you, what do you think whenever you find the people who are around you? And I have this problem with my father as well and their church, that they have their traditions and they're like, well, it's always been this way, you know?
Yes,
but what do you do whenever you find like an absolute contradiction in Scripture?
Well, I had a conversation with somebody who attended a non-denominational Christian church. We talked about communion, and in some Christian churches, you don't take communion, but in the Catholic Church, you take the communion and you drink the wine for the blood of Jesus. While we were having this conversation, it dawned on me. They were like, why do you take the communion? And then I thought about the Last Supper. And when you think about the Last Supper, what are they doing? They're having the bread and the wine.
Yeah, of course.
And that's a symbol of that. So you take that then, but now I think about it in terms of the Last Supper. When you're kneeling or when you're standing, everybody always makes fun of, Catholic churches.
Right.
They do it on purpose so they don't fall asleep. But the thing is, that you kneel and you stand. But I think a lot of it has come from in Rome. In Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, they've put a lot of these, I don't want to say stipulations, but more or less customs, not really Bible, but it is custom that goes, from the days of Caesar. So, and it's just carried on and carried on and carried on. But the thing that is similar is the gathering. And that is when two or more people are gathered together, that's where Jesus is. And in a Catholic church, when two or more people are gathered, that's where Jesus is. And that's the whole study of the New Testament is there. In the midst of, we have our COVID pandemic and things like that, it's more like Zoom church. A lot of churches have been closed and things like that. So the gathering has been broken apart. And what is that doing to the people of faith? Are they falling away from the people from faith? And it might be that we're falling away. And that's not a good thing, because when you have multiple people, when you have massive people, things, you almost form a lock together. And so you need that gathering. So the communion is one thing that I learned through there. And then the other thing was confession. Wow, confession in Catholic Church, you got to do confession. Really? I don't want to have to confess to a priest. I want to go directly to Jesus. Why can't I just confess to him? But if you are a true believer, as I have learned now from the Bible, is you need to confess your sins to another believer so that you are held accountable. That is a difference for me now that I'm kind of learning. I feel like I've been I've had blinders on, and now everything has been open and more clear in my life journey about Christianity.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
So, I was listening to that and I was absorbing all that. Things like Donald Trump rallies came to mind. Holding each other accountable. That is an interesting thing. I don't know. Do you think maybe it's more like you need somebody else you need another person to help you get through life, right? Because, you can sit there and be talking into the clouds all you want, but ultimately you need to bounce something off of another human being to really get an idea. It's an old thing, and it's not an old thing, but it's a recent discovery in psychology that people believe that they know themselves better than they know other people, but at the same time they think they know other people better than those people know themselves.
Interesting.
So
That's kind of like an oxymoron. But, you know, holding someone accountable, if you think of AA and drug and addiction and alcohol addiction, you know, your sponsor calls you and says, hey, you know, are you doing okay? And that person will say, well, you know, I had temptations. Okay, well, let's talk it through. Let's meet. Let's have coffee, and let's go from there. And I think
helping each other out, not really just like trying to, you know, point a finger at the other person and say, well, you need to straighten up, pal.
No. And I think because we're all different, we should kind of limit our judgment. A lot of people go first for the judgment and say, gosh, I wouldn't raise my child like that. Are you kidding? That person's doing that. But then you got to step back and say, you know what? I'm not the parent. I have to step away. It's easy to talk the talk from a distance. But if you're not walking in those people's shoes, then you don't know. So you have to be accountable in that sense. Someone who wants to lose weight and everybody's going to start their diet January 1st, right? Okay. I ate all this food during the Christmas holiday, or during Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all the other holidays in between, and now I'm going to start my diet. So you go to the gym, but 5 days in, you're like, forget it. But if you had somebody there to say, hey, did you go and work out? Yeah. How long did you work out for? An hour. Okay, well then tomorrow you do an hour and a half. And what did you do? And you just you need that. You need that support system in order to move forward. Humans, I believe, are one of the few species that can speak their emotions, and someone will say, well, if dogs or cats or what have you, say, no, my cat knows exactly what I'm thinking. No, not all the time, but we can break down a person by just our words. An animal doesn't do that. An animal will fight you. A lion will fight you. They don't speak. They just do what's innate. And so our innate reaction sometimes is to judge. We need to curb that, because that's why we have so many issues out there right now, with political issues, religious issues, skin issues. I follow a pastor out in Tennessee, and he says, we don't have a skin issue, we have a sin issue. And people will go for the color of their skin first, but you can't, because we're supposed to be made in the image of God. So if we're made in the image of God, we can't be talking about those things to one another.
I really want to thank you for that, for your perspective on that. I mean, you've said a lot of things that have really just made me say, wow. I must have said wow at least 10 times since we've been on here. But I want to ask you another question, because we briefly mentioned politics. And I know that Catholics, for the most part, probably 99% of them are pro-life.
Yes, I would believe so. I would hope so.
In a sense, I would say I am pro-life as well. I'm a missionary, and I serve people, and I do volunteer work. And growing up, our family adopted about 10 kids into our home because, my mom came from a really bad family, and she wanted to save kids from whatever she knew that they would be experiencing, that she experienced growing up. So in a very real sense, I am very pro-life.
I just want to iterate that I would also say that I'm pro-life, though that doesn't necessarily mean I think abortion should be illegal.
Right. And that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. That's what I'm saying. That's where I'm going, is that on a personal level, I am pro-life, just as in the same way on a personal level. And Rob and I have talked a lot about this, that I'm anti-gay marriage. I wouldn't perform a gay marriage, nor would I attend a gay marriage. But on the flip side of that, when I think of what the government's role and the government's responsibility, it's not my job to project my values as a believer to people who are Muslims or Jews or whoever. Why do you think a lot of Catholics feel that they need to stand up as a part of their religion and say other people need to also observe these Christian values that we have?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So are you saying more respecting their religion, or you know how some people say Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas? Are you saying that they want to push their religion onto non-Catholics? Is that how you're saying it?
Yeah, and then they also say that Joe Biden couldn't be a Catholic.
Catholic,
Choice.
yes.
But look,
Gotcha.
my mom was pro-choice for her reasons that were very, very personal to her. And she was a Christian. She believed in Jesus and she loved Jesus Christ. You wouldn't ever know if someone is or isn't Christian by just one thing that they believe in. I see Catholic people making that judge. In fact, I've seen a lot of Catholics with signs that say you can't be Catholic and pro-choice. You know?
Yes,
You know what they call that?
I've seen that too. What do they call that?
They call that a no true Scotsman fallacy. It basically is saying like if you're not checking off the list of A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, therefore you're not a true whatever.
I can't speak for other Catholics. I can speak for myself, and I had challenges getting pregnant early on. My 12-year-old took 13 years in the making. And so I was given a grace really to have this child. And my husband and I, you know, wanted to have kids. And so we did, you know, the IVF, all the other stuff where you take a whole bunch of medications and you shoot yourself up and all those things to try to get pregnant. And I remember when we were going through that, we had to do that at a set time and to get injected with all these bottles. And
wow.
I know, to me personally, I felt this overwhelming guilt that children should not happen this way. In order to get pregnant, to be almost like you're injected like a chicken, you know, or a cow or what have you. And so I had a lot of reservations, but I kept we wanted to have kids, and we were going to try everything possible. After 3 tries, it did not happen. And so we tried to adopt. We met this girl out in Iowa. She was a young mother. She already had a son, and she was pregnant with another son. And we helped her out and everything. And when she had her child, we were there at the hospital, and we got to hold him and everything. And it was absolutely beautiful. She changed her mind the day of discharge.
Wow.
So the day that she was going to give the boy to us, she changed her mind. And that crushed us like you can't believe.
Oh, I can't believe that.
How could God do this to us? How can everything happen like this? On the day that we were going to leave, there was a church at the hotel that we were staying at, and something told us, I don't know, to go to church. And as my husband went to go park the car, I was walking up the stairs. On the stairs was this old homeless woman. Saw her, and I'm looking at her. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm totally in myself because I'm so beaten down. I'm crying. We've been crying for hours and everything. And I walked past her, and I stopped at the top of the stairs, and something told me to turn around. And I turned around, and I looked at her, and she turned around and looked at me, and she said, "Everything's going to be okay." And I was just like, what? What'd she say? And then I went into Mass, and the priest did such a beautiful sermon about forgiveness and love and all this. And my husband and I were just crying and crying and crying, and we couldn't believe it. And after that, you know, we went home and started to live our life, and we figured, well, if God's not going to give us kids, you know, we'll take that one vacation a year, we'll work, and we'll do whatever. Well, 8 months later, I got pregnant with nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. No injection, no nothing. She's our miracle. And so We were so blessed to have a daughter, 10 fingers, 10 toes, everything beautiful. And then, 20 months later, my second daughter was born. I mean, I was like thanking the God, and I thought, wow, you know what? You gave us one daughter. I'm happy. But he didn't want her to be alone, and so he gave her a sister. And so we have two beautiful daughters. But I always felt in my heart that there was the right way. Now I know a lot of people who've had kids through IVF, and it's worked for them. They have beautiful children. But for me personally, it's a conviction that I believe in the natural process as best as it can. Someone will say, well, I can't have it the natural process. Well, no, then you had that one. That's beautiful. I'm happy for you. And people who've had success in adoption, mine was not a success, but someone else's was. And that's beautiful. But I think God tested us in a sense to really see if we were really believing in his faith and his love. And that's what I banked it on. Now I am pro-life for that, because a baby in your womb is the most beautiful thing.
Agreed.
And I can't imagine someone going and doing and butchering a child like that. I can't. I can't intellectually, physically, I can't process that to happen, because for me that's selfish. So I am pro-life as a result of it. And I have a friend's husband his mother was raped, and she decided to have the child even though she was raped. And there's this whole organization of groups of people. The moms did not abort those children. They kept them. And all these people have gotten together, and they've had these groups out there right now. I can't profess my onto someone else, but I can only say my testimony onto them. And that's what it is. But you're right, Isaiah. Some people do say, oh, it's got to be this way or no way. Jesus was if I can say it, a badass. You know what I mean? He told it to you in your face. He was firm with the Pharisees, and he said when he needed to say something, he gave you like a parable that you really had to think about. And what the heck is this guy saying? But he went against the grain because he was there for a purpose. And these Pharisees thought that they were the biggest people ever. They thought that they owned the people. Oh, I'm going to go in the piazza, and I'm going to tell them that you should do this and you should do that. Those aren't people. Those are bullies. And that's going back to what we started talking about, bullies. You have to have it the right way. And he stood alone, and because of that, he was crucified. And that's a shame. But 2,000 and some years later, we continue to praise him.
Amen. First of all, I want to say thank you for sharing that story. That's an amazing story, and I appreciate your courage to share that. And that's phenomenal. But second of all, I get what you're saying, though, that's very real. That's very personal for you. And my wife and I, we lost a kid last year. We had a miscarriage last year. Well, that was one of the hardest things that I went through. And so I totally understand what you're saying. But again, it just has to do with what I think should be projected onto someone else. One, and then two, with things like prayer. Okay, I believe in prayer. I love prayer. Prayer has changed my life, and I think everybody should pray every day, Rob included. But that being said, if
I
we
pray
try
all the
to
time.
all right,
Mostly in the shower.
If we took that into a school, then of course, as a Catholic, you're going to want a Catholic prayer at the school. And me as a Protestant, I'm going to want a Protestant prayer. So involving the church in any way, sense of the word, it just kind of, in my opinion, it takes away from the personal experience that you should be having with yourself and God. What say ye, Rob?
And Chiara, the thing that you got to know about me is that I definitely think when it comes to religion, it is a personal, individual experience. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why we have so many varied beliefs. And, we try so hard to like organize it and try to say, oh, this is the way, this is the way, this is the way. But when it comes down to it, everybody's religious experience is their individual experience. And whether it's their belief that it's an experience with some sort of God, or a commune with nature, or just a commune with themselves or something like that. When it comes to that's basically why I'm at heart a secularist, because
Mm.
I don't believe in prescribing an all size fits one a one size fits all thing to all of the community. We have things that we have to agree on, obviously. But when it comes to one's personal relationship with how they're struggling through life, we need each other. Obviously, each person's perspective is ultimately unique.
So
There
let
you
me
go.
ask you this. So if you, if someone comes into your life like right at the moment when you needed them,
Mm-hmm.
do you find that it was coincidence or it is supernatural in a sense? Like, wow, how did I see this person and come into my life at just the right time? Did they know that? You know what I'm saying? I guess
Sure.
I believe that, sometimes there are angels everywhere. And so you could be sitting next to someone who is an angel there and you don't even know it. How do
Right.
you see that?
If that were to happen, I think that's mostly a coincidence. Of course, I it feels, I would think it's miraculous, but I think life itself is kind of a miracle that is more like winning the lottery than anything else, because life is full of chances. Your chance comes up, it's good. It's good. You like that. And obviously you're going to see that as good for me, good for me. This is exactly what I needed at this time. And it would be easy for me to put it in some sort of miraculous context, so that some sort of supernatural being looked down upon me and said, he needs this, so I'm going to give him that. But
Mm-hmm.
in the end, I don't really put the world in that context at all.
Okay, that's
So,
interesting.
Rob and I, we've got to talk about our own personal experiences. And Rob believes in a lot of coincidences and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
very lucky stuff just happening, such
oh
as
yeah, no,
everyone
it's lucky
as
we're even alive, because
right.
you know what the chances of me being alive on this planet in this part of the universe, you know,
Very small. Uh,
So
uh,
yeah.
can I ask you a question? This is kind of a little like off topic, but do most Catholics, would you say, believe in evolution, or think that there's something? Because I'm actually a Protestant and I do believe in evolution. I don't think it's even remotely reasonable to think that something like that could come about by chance. Like I see the divine hand working to orchestrate that. But do many Catholics believe in like a strict interpretation of, okay, 6,000 years ago God just created everything out of nothing?
I would say most Catholics would probably believe that in Adam and Eve, and that God created, God created the world because, on day one he did this, on day two he added the water, on day three he added this, all the way through the end of the week, and then he rested. We actually did a visit, my family and I, in Kentucky, the Ark of
Right.
Noah. And it was so beautiful, and they built the Ark the same exact size and the dimensions of when Noah built the ark way back when, thousands of years ago. And they took it word for word in building the dimensions of that. And they had comparison of how it all started and how God put it together and everything. So I don't necessarily believe in like the Big Bang Theory per se. That's me personally. What intrigues me a lot are the planets and how they are all, you know, how they all been aligned and that sort of thing. Like this past Monday, the 21st, if you remember reading about Saturn and Jupiter aligning, and you know, and a lot of people called it the Christmas star. It hadn't been seen in over 800 years, and they're saying that it was the same kind of star that was over Bethlehem when Jesus was born, and you know, the brightness of it and that sort of thing. And then you think, wow, well, I mean, how did this come about during the week of Christmas? And for most Catholics, you know, that is a miracle in and of itself. I would say even the Christians would say that is a miracle.
You mean even the Protestants? I'm going to catch you. I'm going to correct you because if Rob called me out on it, I'm calling you out on it. So,
okay.
Well, you're bringing up some astrology into this discussion, and well, I love astronomy. You know,
Okay.
I love looking at the planets, and oh yes, I am happy that I got to see the conjunction happen. There's going to be a total eclipse that I'm going to be taking a trip to Texas for in 2024 to see that. So that's going to be an amazing thing. Why don't we go ahead and let's tell people where they can find you, Chiara.
Okay.
And how let's tell people where they can find you. Do you have any social medias? Do you have any promotional stuff? Any websites that you want to direct people to?
I have a website. It is www.chiaratalluto.com, and it's CHIARA Talluto, TALLUTO.com. So it's www.chiaratalluto.com.
Great.
And I am on Facebook at Chiara Talluto Author.
Great.
You can get me on there. On Twitter, I'm just at Chiara Talluto. You can find me on Twitter.
And how can people buy your works? What's your latest work called?
It's my latest work is called She Made It Matter, and it's an inspirational fiction. My first book was Love's Perfect Surrender, and that is a Christian romance. And
where
then
can
my
people
two,
get
they are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Smashwords.
Great.
It's an ebook as well as on paperback. And then my two middle grade fantasy fairy tales are Petrella the Gillian Princess and A Tribute to Talipia.
And those two I found on iBooks on the
Yes.
Apple Store.
Yes.
So, great. Well, we want to thank you so much.
Yeah, Chiara.
Great.
I can't even say thank you enough times. I mean, precisely what I wanted to do with this podcast was give people an opportunity to express themselves, throw out their ideas, show respect, allow people to articulate themselves in what they believe in rather than what I think that they believe in. This is a little fact about me, but before I was a Christian in my other life, I traveled around the world looking into lots and lots of different religions, such as Buddhism, Islam, Baha'ism. And, I found it fascinating to see what people believed. I was very interested in fact, I got most of the religions tattooed on my body. I was so fascinated by it. Yeah, I got quite, my mom was not very happy about that one. But you know what? But now as a believer, I do want to share the gospel with people. But at the same time, before I can ask anybody to hear what I have to say, I want to hear what people have to say. And I want to afford them the same kind of opportunity that I'm asking them to show me. So this is this is an avenue in which I'm doing that. And I really want to thank you for being a part of it.
Oh, and I want to thank both you and Rob for what you're doing. And I could see how your mission for respect and humility and empathy with humans and how we can have dialogue and disagreements and agreements and debates about learning about each other. And I think that's so very important to hold on to and to continue with that mission. So I would hope and pray that both you and Rob will continue doing that and sharing your thoughts and beliefs, and also hearing how, when you have your guests, thinking and hearing what their thoughts are, because it's very enlightening to learn about other faiths, other traditions, and you never know, you learn something, and you have to keep learning. And I think that's what we're all after. So continue with that respect, humility, and empathy.
So I just wanted to say thank you for your time, Chiara. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much, and good luck to you. We'll hear from you very soon, and you guys stay safe out there, okay?
Okay. All right. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year. Thank you both very, very much.
And join us again on the RHE podcast.